Hi, everyone. Welcome to Electrifying the Majority. How do we move from early adopters to heat pumps for all? If you're in the wrong room, too bad you're stuck with us now. So I want to kick us off with a big thanks to NY-GEO for the wonderful conference and day that they've put together, a lot of the learnings that we've been getting to do, and I'm sure a lot of the wonderful connections you've been making with folks. So big thanks to the folks who set this up and the sponsors. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful experts and panelists here, and then I think we can just kick it right off with the discussion that we have for you. It's going to be pretty casual and pretty informal, which is why I'm going to stop standing at the podium and actually go and sit down with my friends over here. Okay, so first we have Sahara James, Program Manager at Kinetic Communities Consulting. Sahara is also the Queens and Staten Island Hub Director while serving in her role as a Program Manager at KC3. Within this role, she's also led Electrify New York City, a home electrification pilot, and provided engagement insight for upcoming solar programming in New York City. Her background is in environmental engineering consulting, where she led inspections for hazardous materials in public schools and NY-GEO developments. She recently completed an MBA in sustainability at Bard College and looks forward to continuing to serve as a voice for energy equity in New York. Next, we have Jenna Lawson, Clean Energy Hub Director at the Climate Solutions Accelerator at the Genesee Finger Lakes region. Jenna comes from a housing equity background, previously working at Connected Communities to create affordable rental and home ownership opportunities and prevent evictions in the Beechwood, East Main, Mustard, and Atlantic Avenue neighborhoods in Rochester, New York. She is passionate about making sure that historically marginalized communities equitably benefit from the transition to a clean energy future. Is it just me or is this echoing a lot? There is a weird echo. Sorry to make everybody get up. Yeah, but I'm hearing the echo. I feel like all of you are hearing the echo.
No, I have been thinking maybe if we turn these like so.
Up there?
It's worse to you than it is to us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yours are facing that way.
Okay.
And it's all about us.
That's fair. I know it was distracting me. I felt like it might distract y'all. Okay. Is this okay? Can folks in the back hear all right?
We're recording though.
Oh, you're recording. Oh no, not Chris. Protect Chris at all costs.
Is it better?
Chris, what about that mic?
Talk for a second. Does it still echo?
Maybe, a little bit. But if it's not bad for y'all,
I think it's better.
okay. Okay, yeah, a little bit further away. All right, Samir, sorry to interrupt your introduction, but we also have Samir Ranade, the Senior Advisor for Climate Justice at NYSERDA on the Energy, Climate, and Equity team. He holds a BA in Political Science from Washington State University and an MPA in Environmental Policy and Management from the University of Washington. His background includes extensive work experience as a legislative staffer and election campaign organizer at state, congressional, and presidential levels, and with clean energy and environmental nonprofits and government agencies. Samir's expertise is at the intersection of ethics, social science, climate policy, and public administration. All right, so I am so excited to have this conversation for a couple of reasons. It feels like we're at an inflection point of sorts. Heat pump sales have regularly outpaced gas furnace sales since 2022. In the regulatory sphere, we're seeing thermal energy networks being piloted and planned by our gas utilities. So there is a lot of public acceptance of this new modern technology, well, new to us. And then New York State is also undergoing some program improvements in the New Efficiency New York portfolio, which means that there's going to be a lot of program improvements and policy improvements to some of the programs that serve folks looking for energy efficiency and building electrification upgrades. So we're in an exciting moment. So maybe let's take a little tiny step back, and I want to have each of you start off by saying a few words about how your organization is working towards equitable and inclusive heat pump adoption and what your role at your organization is. And Chris had a really good reminder that this is being recorded, so for anyone who's listening later, maybe first say your name before answering.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Lawson. I am the Clean Energy Hub Director in the Finger Lakes region. Has anyone heard of NYSERDA Clean Energy Hubs before? Yeah, we're going to get the rest of you today. All right. So our job as the Clean Energy Hub is to make sure that the transition to a clean energy future is equitable, making sure at least 35 to 40% of NYSERDA designated disadvantaged communities, either by geographic region or by income, are benefiting from our services. We provide energy advisement services where we essentially take folks all the way through from hi, I have a no heat emergency to, okay, so I could either get a furnace here, I could get a heat pump there, ooh, there's a heat pump hot water heater, what shall I do? We notably are not salespeople. We make no benefit off of getting people in behind the wheel of a car over something else. But we are there to kind of ensure that the client has an advocate and especially focus on our disadvantaged low to moderate income folks. And in our region, 47% of our community is considered a disadvantaged community either by income, geography, or both. So we work on an outreach and engagement funnel to installation pipeline, starting out with the education, using that shared language. I think it was great before we talked about we need to call things geothermal or ground source heat pumps. We cannot just keep switching up the vernacular and speaking in insider terms, but making things really accessible and exciting to new markets. We also advocate and convene stakeholders, both residential folks and installers, to advocate for streamlined programs that work better and include more people. And most importantly, I think I come to this work, I'm very indoorsy. I care about climate change because I care about people. I don't want to see anyone's grandma stroking out in the summertime. So it's really important for us to leverage clean energy opportunities to meet the most pressing needs, including high energy bills, no heat emergencies, health and safety, the negative health impacts of gas appliances, all that good stuff. So that is our hub.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I am Samir Ranade, Senior Advisor for Climate Justice. So thank you so much for joining this session. I think it's really important. I'll start with providing some background on NYSERDA. We're a public authority, and we help promote clean energy and emission reduction across New York's economy and energy system. And we aim to do so in a way that advances environmental and economic justice. Our president and CEO, who spoke earlier this morning, she is the co-chair of the Climate Action Council. That was established by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, our groundbreaking landmark climate change law, which we'll call the Climate Act for short. And that required the production of a scoping plan to kind of set a roadmap for how we're going to achieve our ambitious climate and or greenhouse gas reduction and climate justice goals. So broadly, that definitely includes heat pump adoption. And we also have, a number of programs that provide statewide support for market development, growing the workforce and supply chain, supporting innovation, getting homes heat pump ready, supporting low and moderate income populations through projects, pilot projects, incentives, and outreach like through the clean energy hubs like Jenna mentioned. We also work with partners through New York State Clean Heat, which is a collaboration with investor-owned electric utilities, to more effectively deliver financial incentives for heat pumps. We also help promote the incentives that are made available by the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. We actually have a large-scale thermal program, and there's funding available for that through Program Opportunity Notice 5614, and you'll get the slides, so go check that out on our website. Along with financing, we support the adoption through our ongoing implementation, which we'll get into more of, the Disadvantaged Communities Barriers and Opportunities Report. This was a part of the recommendation within the scoping plan on making clean energy accessible to every community, and so by overcoming the barriers, and so that's going to be a big part of it. Broadly speaking, my work involves engaging historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities in the policy process to ensure that there are equitable opportunities to give input in the development of programs and policies. I'm specifically focusing on doing outreach for New York's Cap and Invest program right now, which is a regulation that will set a limit on how much greenhouse gases can be allowed across the economy. It will require those entities that are responsible for the pollution to buy allowances from the state, and that will generate proceeds. And those proceeds can be used for heat pump adoption, and I'll get more into that as well. Thank you.
Okay, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Sahara James, and as Avni mentioned, I work with Kinetic Communities Consulting. Kinetic Communities was founded just 6 years ago, as of last month, by our founder, who really was focused on the fact that there are forgotten communities in New York City, people of color and low-income people who are being left behind by the clean energy transition. And our organization is focused on making sure that we can access these people and make sure that they are also benefiting from the clean energy transition. The main way that we do that is by engaging local community benefit organizations. And so there are various organizations throughout New York City that we work with to help organize programs such as the Queens and Staten Island Hub, like was mentioned earlier. And so we really use the power of the organizations around us and our professional staff to essentially provide consulting services to help our communities access clean energy, both for small residential, large residential, and also with strategic planning for organizations that are looking to do energy planning in the future. And so we've provided an array of services. Our real focus is making sure that the communities in New York City are not being forgotten and are still benefiting from the clean energy transition from residential to workforce. And so that's where our strength is. And of course, with that, we are focusing on electrifying both small and large buildings alike. And so, like I said, we provide advising. We are working with communities one-on-one, building owners, tenants, landlords. We're working with them all to move forward the clean energy transition for everyone in New York City.
Thank you all for that little bit of level setting. I think it's really helpful to understand where you all are coming from. And Sahara, as you noted, we are seeing communities being left behind in the clean energy transition. And I think, Sahara, you and Jenna have both led your hub teams in conducting what's called the Regional Assessment and Barriers Analysis. So I'll turn it over to you both to say a little bit about what that effort was. But as part of your work, you were identifying barriers and solutions to energy efficiency and electrification in your communities. And as a result, there's a huge wealth of amazing data across the state on the state of our buildings and our communities. So maybe tell us a little bit about what that process looked like for you and a couple of key takeaways about what you learned about the challenges of trying to electrify a hard to electrify home.
Yeah, I think it really opened my eyes to the fact that programs that are not designed to eradicate structural inequality and racism inevitably end up exacerbating it. I think the best laid plans, often go awry, and we've seen that in the kind of pilot rollout of the Inflation Reduction Act, unfortunately, which was meant to prioritize low to moderate income folks. To start with, so it's the pilot rollout, great. So we're going to guinea pig test on low and moderate income people, some of the most distressed folks, and see if we can get it right with them before we roll it out to market rate folks. If you stop to think about it for a little bit, it's a little nutty. And we saw that kind of end a couple of things that were actually working really well to make things more accessible. I'll give the example, as Avni said, I used to work in the Beechwood and Emma neighborhoods in Rochester, New York. famously redlined, meaning that they were discriminated against and had unfavorable lending, basically structurally disinvested in and underdeveloped by their own city. So now we see this majority black and brown community, and what was really great is for a time, the Empower Plus program, a $10,000 energy efficiency grant program, used GEO eligibility, which was really big for us in the city of Rochester because basically I could go block by block and without asking someone, hey, you look like maybe you don't make a lot of money. Is that true? What do you make? How much money do you have? I could say everybody on this block is automatically eligible for a $10,000 energy efficiency grant. Is that something you're interested in? Do you have any energy concerns in your home? Oh my gosh, your bills are really high? Oh, you don't have a bathroom vent fan and it's super moldy in there? Let's talk more about that. So by getting rid of that, instead of automatically qualifying people, now, especially renters, have to then prove that they're eligible for these programs. And a lot of times that means now I have to show my landlord my income information, really exacerbating that power dynamic. So not that they weren't qualified before, but it kind of like takes the dignity out of the process of getting the benefits that they should and do qualify for as a community. So that happened because NYSERDA wanted to roll the Inflation Reduction Act funding into Empower Plus. So, okay, we're going to make one simple streamlined program amazing, but by taking away something that was working and we were using in 20% of our applications, we're actually making a bigger barrier. Likewise, we know that funding's limited, right? Of course it is. But when we decided, the state decided between the Department of Public Service and NYSERDA that they were not going to allow natural gas customers to access heat pump incentives. Now, I want you to start to think where the majority of people of color in New York State live. I know somebody said, I think in the last section, 60% of Long Island is on delivered fuels. Like, I don't mean to be crass, but how many black people are in Long Island? Like, maybe not as many as we might think. And additionally, the people in those communities that are on delivered fuels, they have had the structural benefit of things like the GI Bill, getting their first home super affordably. My grandparents, for example, they were able to get the heat pump benefit, my grandmother, and they got their home for like 3 blueberries and a wish in 1955. Meanwhile, we have these communities of color who have been structurally barred from being able to become homeowners in the first place. And now they're the majority of natural gas customers, and we're saying this $8,000 incentive is not for you. So while I understand the desire to streamline plans and roll them out, I think the biggest thing that this RABA has taught me, regional assessment and barriers analysis, sorry, no alphabet soup over here, is that you cannot create and have this obsession with a zero-sum game that if I get something, that means you don't get it. And this obsession with finding the perfect victim, the most worthy person who is over 60 and has a child under 5 and is super low income, but also has a great credit score and has never missed a mortgage payment in 30 years. When you try to find this little unicorn of a person, you start making a judgment call on who deserves to benefit from the clean energy future that is highly discriminatory. And so that's the main thing that I think our hub is working to counteract, because we really do believe that this does need to be the majority, and it needs to be people who've contributed the least to climate change and experienced its worst impacts.
I hate following up after Jenna. I think that in putting together the regional assessment and barriers analysis for the Queens of Staten Island hub, it was definitely a fascinating process to see everything kind of reflected in a lot of the work that I've already done at KC3 to kind of look back and say, like, okay, this data tracks, right? I would say some of the most important points that were coming out of our RABA and things that we're really trying to implement with the hub now. Something unique in New York City, obviously renting is very common as opposed to other counties outside of the New York City area. And so there's a very specific and unique landlord-tenant relationship that is quite tricky to navigate when we are talking about small residential buildings, especially when we talk about the split incentive. For those who might not be aware, there's the issue that essentially landlords are required to provide heat in their tenant buildings. They are not required to provide electricity, so for the average tenant, they are paying for that. When we talk about electrification, we're talking about moving the cost of heating from the landlord to the tenant. That is a very hard sell when you are thinking about temporary housing situations that are, normally common for renting. And so there's a hard buy-in as landlords are saying, well, I don't know if I want to, transfer that bill over to them. It may be hard for me to get renters in moving forward, and it also isn't fair to the tenant who are low income. They might not have the flexibility for that increase in their utility bill. So that's a very tricky waters that we're still navigating when it comes to upgrades, when it comes to smaller buildings, and so that is something that I know NYSERDA, like through all of the hubs, we're working together to try to think through this process. So there's a lot of brainstorming in that space. Another thing that is very important in New York City, specifically in the county of Queens, Queens is known for having over 200 spoken languages across households. It's one of the most diverse counties in the country, and I believe in the world. And while that is a beautiful, beautiful thing, it is very, very challenging when you're trying to reach all of these people, and you have an organization that mostly speaks one language, maybe one person that is somewhat halfway fluent in in other non-English languages. And so we are navigating have accessibility for households that really actually aren't being reached when it comes to NYSERDA low-income programming. We saw that non-English speaking households are much less likely to be receiving funding from NYSERDA when it comes to upgrades in their homes. So that's a huge barrier that we're trying to navigate and overcome. And so that language accessibility piece is extremely important for us. And if we can't talk about real energy equity, if we are leaving out non-English speaking people, especially for example in a borough like Queens. We're also seeing that single family homes seem to have a lot easier time accessing these funds, and so that 2 to 4 family home is a building sector that is getting a little less love there, and so that does have to do again with that landlord-tenant relationship that is trickier to navigate due to the split incentive. And one other thing that's really prominent in Queens and Staten Island is there are a lot of very old, very, very old residential buildings that, not only do they have an older heating system, there are a lot of the times health and safety issues in that building, whether it's mold or lead, and that will put a stop on work if it is a barrier to getting upgrades done in your home. So we are seeing that the low-income folks that we're interacting with, they're already making a stretch to be able to do clean energy and energy efficiency upgrades in their homes. But they also, of course, don't have the extra disposable income for health and safety upgrades as well. And New York City has a very disappointingly limited fund for health and safety upgrades for the residential buildings. And so we're seeing that that's an issue as well. So in our RABA, like I said, we were seeing these things kind of be patterns as we were doing previous programming through NYSERDA, but we're seeing that these issues are still very much barriers as well. So yeah, I guess I'm happy to transition into, what else has come up.
Yeah, thank you for the on the ground learnings. And Samir, I guess to take an aerial view of things, you have a bit of a statewide view of all of the RABAs, and you also have some slides. So I'll let you take it away at the podium.
On the RABAs, there's a lot to learn from those. So first, I'll talk a little bit more about the hubs. I think the hubs really are vital to the successful implementation of the Climate Act because, climate justice is central to that. And, there's the requirement that 35 to 40% of the benefits of states' clean energy investments occur in disadvantaged communities and by the way, disadvantaged communities, that was defined by a process in the Climate Act that was, it was voted on by the Climate Justice Working Group, and it includes environmental and climate burdens and the social determinants of health. So the Climate Act, like I mentioned, it requires the state to produce the barriers and opportunities report, and that was really focused on community ownership and access to clean energy and climate resilience measures, with a particular emphasis on the residential and community level. So I want to discuss, some of the barriers that were identified in that report, but also, in addition to the barriers, one of the key themes as far as the solutions, I think, are really what the hubs embody. One of those themes are making public processes more inclusive. And the hubs really take that on in a number of ways. They improve our ability to engage residents in the participation of programs, and they get feedback from community members, and that improves our ability to meet our climate justice goals. And the hubs, they exist in all 10 regional economic development council regions of our state, and there are 3 in New York City. Each of the hubs is led by a community-based organization, and they have been hard at work on the regional assessment and barriers analysis RABAs, so I call them RABAs for short. And these RABAs will be invaluable data points on improving our access to programs. Going to the next slide here. So I want to go more into what those barriers were, but before I do that, I want to describe the Energy Equity Collaborative that NYSERDA has, which is another key climate justice body. The collaborative consists of 13 community-based organizations and 8 state agencies. The community-based organizations are a part of our steering committee, and they're working on achieving the outcomes that are on the slide. The collaborative will help develop the knowledge, the connections, and capacity of disadvantaged community stakeholders to inform state clean energy planning. Importantly, it'll provide a dedicated forum for NYSERDA and other state entities to provide updates on plans and actions to frontline communities, and to create a place where we can get feedback in a structured but informal manner to support greater transparency, accountability, and relationship building. And the interagency presence of the collaborative can really help streamline efforts and utilize synergies among different programs and goals that drive towards the same outcome. The collaborative will also have topical working groups, which are still being built out, which will include more organizations. There's 4 topical working groups. Probably most relevant to this is the housing, building efficiency, and electrification one. There's also one on workforce development and economic opportunities, one on energy transition, and then one on engagement and access. These working groups can go a little bit more in depth on some of the programmatic considerations and then provide recommendations for the full collaborative. Also, not mentioned on this slide, but an integral part of the Energy Climate Equity team, which I'm on, is a disadvantaged community stakeholder services pool, and where we can have stakeholder organizations that are compensated for providing input to NYSERDA. That'll be another place where we can get really good in-depth input on policy issues. And there will also eventually be a public forum for improving our outreach and ensuring that the public, and particularly every disadvantaged community, is engaged in our processes. So now let me get to the barriers. So this basically, it's put into 4 categories. These were the original 4 categories of barriers that were in the original Barriers Opportunities report. What you see below them are some snippets of input that we have heard on an ongoing basis. This is input we've gotten from members of the collaborative. I've also had the chance to look through the RABAs and kind of do like my own little synthesis of that. And so the RABAs are preliminary right now, but I kind of included what I found from there as well. So under physical and economic structures, it's no surprise that old, dilapidated building stock, that's a huge barrier to getting upgrades done. And it, because it requires a whole lot of other things that were already mentioned that need to be done first, like fixing a leaky roof or insulating the home or fixing the structural foundation. Multifamily rental split incentives, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. That is also another significant barrier that remains. There's also the high cost of moving to the financial and knowledge resources and capacity barriers. There's the high cost of energy upgrades, and they can be expensive even after we've heard even after building operators or building owners get incentives. It's still expensive for them to complete the upgrade. There's also challenges to kind of braiding like all of this different information. There's like incentives that exist in a lot of different places, and then you have to like put it all together. So that's been expressed as a challenge. Something you may be familiar with, contractors. There's challenges to, creating training opportunities for contractors that provide wraparound services. In rural communities, it can be especially hard to provide training to contractors just because of the huge distance. Perspective and information barriers. There's a lack of trust among program implementers. So we have to do a better job to build trust among communities. There can be a lot of reasons for that. Maybe programs didn't deliver as they were promised. There can be also language communication barriers, as was just mentioned. So we need to design outreach and campaign efforts to be multilingual. There's also disinformation campaigns out there, and that can cause confusion over what the benefits of clean energy really are. And then finally, there's a lot of program design and implementation barriers. One of the chief ones was just, there's application processes can be cumbersome. There can be, it can just be really time consuming and just confusing to people. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done to improve upon those. So I would say this is probably a decent snapshot of not all, but a foundation of some of the core barriers that are on the top of our radar and that we're working to address. So thank you.
Thank you, Samir. And I think a lot of what I see on this slide is something that I heard reflected in what Jenna and Sahara were speaking to earlier. And one thing I wanted to dig a little bit deeper in on, because I think I've heard you both at different points talk about some of the workforce development challenges in your areas. And Sahara, I know that is something that KC3 is heavily involved in. So I would like to pass it to you to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you, Avni. So to expand a bit on the workforce development piece when we're talking about a just clean energy transition, it's making sure that we can engage the residents who need to be reached and need assistance in their homes. But it's also about incentivizing the workforce that actually is doing the work, the people installing the insulation and the heat pumps and the solar panels. These organizations, they are private businesses, and they essentially need to be incentivized and engaged enough to be able to both work with low-income residents who are looking for this support and also be able to navigate the programs on the business side so that they can participate in these programs, they can properly apply incentives to quotes, apply for these funds, and make sure that they actually turn into a discount for their actual customers. Something that is seeing in terms of workforce engagement, but on a bit of a deeper level, when we're having those one-on-one conversations with contractors, it seems that there's definitely a disconnect between energy programming and with contractors for things that you kind of spoke to a bit, Samir. But essentially, contractors are feeling like the application process is cumbersome, that there are changing program rules that are very hard for them to navigate and continue to train their staff on and to stay on updated on, so that each quote that is put out every single day has that new number or is applied to the right type of project. It's very challenging to stay on top of those changing program rules. And so what we're seeing now is, because it is more cumbersome to be a participating contractor in these programs, when contractors don't want to, they're simply falling out of it. And sometimes they are not officially, withdrawing themselves from a program. Their name is still on, the X Energy Program website, but when you call them, they will just say, no, we actually don't participate in this program anymore. And that's really, really challenging and can be very demoralizing when there are residents who are reaching out for assistance and they're essentially getting no's because, there's a lack of participation. And so one thing that we've identified is that contractors really need to be motivated, incentivized, and feel like they can easily contribute to these programs. And so that means that they have an updated understanding of program rules. They're able to train their staff on how these rules are changing. They can engage residents and give them the correct information, and they can actually complete projects and also make sure that on the back end that they're getting paid in a timely fashion, because a lot of contractors, they're small businesses and they don't, have the capital, the cash flow to have payments that are behind from programs that are owing them money. And so that is a really important part of the workforce piece. And the last thing I wanted to add is actually in a meeting that was hosted by the Department of Public Services a few weeks ago, there were contractors there who were speaking from their perspective on what it takes to really be a good participating contractor in these programs. It's not just a matter of knowing the rules; it's having the staff, it's having the transportation force, it's being able to have the connections with other contractors that they can subcontract with and really have different kind of moving pieces working together to get one project done. And that administrative capacity, every contractor doesn't have that. And so we really need to make sure that we are empowering our workforce so that they can build their skill sets and their capacity so that they can participate in these programs, and that they also feel motivated to work with the communities that need this help the most.
Yeah, I think to put a pin on Sahara's point, contractors are quiet quitting. Like, they're just sort of seeing how it goes and taking a couple less projects. And I think that's because if you've ever been to like a residential program update meeting and seen, okay, now these 7 things are changing and we need you to geotag this. I think a good example in our Rochester or our Finger Lakes region. So over the course of 3 years, 91 contractors did at least one Empower Plus, one energy efficiency project. Of those, 20 did one and never again. And in fact, in our region, the top 16 contractors do 85% of the work. So when you think about the administrative burden of getting through the process, there's people who just can't reach that scale. I think like a promising solution that I think NYSERDA has kind of thought of before and is really good is thinking about kind of cost sharing and admin across several small businesses so that they can actually compete in the market and do the work that they need to do. Because Sahara's absolutely right. When we lose people who are willing to go through NYSERDA programs, other grant programs, that just means that resource and that price point and that timeliness is no longer available to the people who need it most in the time that they need it most. So I think on that, on the worker side, a lot of our clean energy jobs are not on a bus line. They're not somewhere you can walk to. They're often out in the field. They're in people's homes. And so thinking about those, again, structural barriers like childcare, transportation, speaking English, thinking about like there's a couple pilots I've seen of like Spanish and HVAC, like dual immersion programs that I think are really promising to get people on the right path to having a job. And I think there's also maybe a little bit of a unresolved tension between the clean energy sector mostly being a kind of ununionized sector where people are in like the electric or plumbers union or pipe fitters union and think that there's no way that these skills can transfer or that they can keep the benefits of their union while going into clean energy. And I think we haven't really reckoned with that. We know like our presidential administration is very pro-union, but if the existing trades are, or the clean energy trades are a bit newer and are not unionized, we haven't really thought about how to actually contend with getting our hands around that workforce and making sure that people feel the same pride and security that they do of, I'm in the plumbers union, you know, I'm in the pipe fitters union. So I think there's a tension in that security as well.
Yeah, thank you. These are really some sticky challenges, and I think that I'm really lobbing a hot potato of a question at you all now, because I'd love to talk a little bit about the solutions. And we might make this a little bit of a lightning round so that we can leave some time for audience questions. So maybe Sahara and Jen, I'll have you kick it off again, and then I know Samir, you'll have a couple slides to close us out with. But for Jenna and Sahara first, what are some of the solutions that you're seeing or would like to see as our kind of on the ground program implementers? Like, in other words, how do we make these programs and this funding make sense for people's lives?
Okay. All right, here we go. I think one of the things I'm seeing that's really promising is that we're starting to demystify and contextualize clean energy. I think having that shared common language is great. Making people who may not have considered themselves as part of a just transition or having a job that's affected by energy, people like gas station workers and bus drivers, understand that this is part of the overall healthy community. It's been really encouraging, I think, to see a lot of community-based organizations, folks who do things like help with rental assistance and make people enroll in SNAP and HEAP and get the benefits that they need, and kind of premise it to people and educate the public, and especially people who have been systemically disenfranchised from thinking of themselves as part of this, you know, elite, erudite, you know, kind of industry. See, no, this actually affects my life. There are things I can do now. I am supposed to be the priority population for this. So leveraging clean energy to address quality of life and priority concerns in disadvantaged communities, I think, is one of the most promising things that I've seen. The population I focus on often have homes that have historically made them sick or are still making them sick, having higher rates of asthma, having traffic exhaust, lead and asbestos and mold, and it goes on. Like, we don't always have the luxury to think of clean energy if we have standing sewage in our basement. So when we think of clean energy as a wraparound solution, I think in the last section we talked about the Green Affordable Pre-Electrification Fund, thinking about things like enabling measures that we aren't going to just say, well, we just really want your house to be electrified, but good luck with the sewage in your basement. When we start taking a holistic approach and thinking of people as people and thinking of their quality of life holistically, I think it's really exciting to see how people get excited and cling to the idea of clean energy to heat pumps as something that can, like, measurably improve their lives. I think we're seeing unified stakeholder kind of sentiment on against the natural gas exclusion, against the paternalism of assuming that just because someone is low income that they can't care about the climate or that they automatically won't be interested in clean energy, but actually understanding that, yes, those people often do because they're the first and worst affected by climate change. And so I think we're also looking at, like, the scrutiny of models that don't anticipate the equipment lifespan trends. Like right now, for example, NYSERDA demands that for a heat pump project to get approved, you need to have at least 20% savings over the life of the equipment, which they're taking that by taking the aggregate of the previous 3 years, not the 15 years looking forward that the equipment is actually going to be in someone's home. And additionally, when I have someone in a no heat emergency, 20% savings would be amazing, and I think oftentimes we do hit that. But first of all, the burden on the contractors to prove that that's going to happen is insane. And those people with no heat today would be thrilled to break even, or maybe even pay a little more to have air conditioning for the first time in their lives as we are experiencing unprecedented heat waves. So I really like being here today because one of the things that makes me excited is seeing, especially geothermal, I think, this interest in local pilots as proof of concept and moving into large scale. Not just accepting it's expensive, no one's done it before, it can't work here. I hope to see that deployed in, like, kind of mixed community levels. Like churches and nonprofits are some of the most mission aligned folks who would love a geothermal system, and yet They are a nonprofit, they have a limited budget, and so I think creating things like financing products that work for them, or even just saying, let's prioritize doing pilots in community spaces, not just someone's home or an apartment building that maybe no one will ever go in. If we say this congregation is brought to you today by geothermal energy, doesn't everybody feel so comfortable today? It kind of opens up the ability for people to learn and not fear it as much and think of it as something common that's in their community that is for them. And then I think just seeing the early signs of awareness from tech experts such as yourselves about the systemic barriers that exist and the desire to adapt products and services and incentives to actually work for people. I was super encouraged to see like the folks wanting the tax credit to be refundable. Because like, for example, solar tax credits, not refundable. And yeah, if somebody comes to our clean energy hub and wants solar panels on their house and they have a good roof for it, we're super stoked to help them do that. But when you only have non-refundable tax credits, you are essentially creating a luxury good. You are commodifying clean energy and saying this is for people who can go above and beyond. So I'm super excited to see your net zero house, but I want to know how it's going to scale to my neighbors on my block. So those are some of the things I'm excited to see, and I hope that we keep pushing for.
Yeah, and to add on to some of Jenna's points, we're seeing, I think some of the few things that we're seeing when it comes to like what's working on the ground is starting with this IRA funding that's been essentially folded into Empower Plus. That is a really good example of something that Samir actually kind of mentioned, the idea that when there are different pools of funding and different applications for people to get the money that they need for upgrades, that makes the process a lot more cumbersome, right? Like if I have to fill out one application, that's one thing. If I have to fill out 2 applications, that can feel like a lot more. And if I need to prove my income more than once and prove, that I'm using social services more than once. So the more that we're able to fold new funding into our existing programs, Empower Plus is already a very robust and built out program when it comes to weatherization upgrades. The more that we can utilize what is existing and like not rebuilding the wheel, I think that's where we'll continue to see the most success. But as you said, Jenna, it has to be folding in funding that makes sense. So like you said, like the natural gas exclusion for heat pump customers, that is not something that is benefiting the communities that we're working with, but definitely folding into the existing programming that already has some level of familiarity in our communities is where I think we have the most strength and the most fertile ground when it comes to more successful and equitable projects. Another thing, building off the contractor and workforce development support point I was bringing up earlier, the more incentive that contractors have to work with us, like I said, the better. So an opportunity for contractors to get paid for completing certain projects. There is another organization, Pratt Center, that is running the Energy Fit program, and they are essentially compensating contractors when they complete a project, between $250 and $500. They started with building that relationship with that contractor. They know that this is a group of people they can depend on for getting clean energy projects, and they had that incentive of knowing I'm getting a little bit more in my business just to do this work as well. So they're kind of doubly motivated to do that work. So I think of being more creative with how we can compensate contractors for the extra time that they're putting in to kind of work through these projects is really, really important if we want to keep getting these projects done. Another thing that's really important, like we said about the health and safety upgrades that are really common. Okay, wrap it up. Really common. The more gap funding that we can have for completing these projects, the better. I'm currently working with several projects where folks are not able to get the work done simply just because they don't have the money. They have a quote that is built out, but they don't have the financing that's available to finish out the project. And I'll wrap up my last 2 points. I think that we have an opportunity here as people are becoming more aware of of this energy programming more and more. The reach out that we're doing, folks are more aware of clean energy, they're aware of climate change, they know what their impact is, and they really want to make a difference. They simply just don't have the accessibility financially to do that. So there's momentum that we have to build on with people who are motivated to do this work. And essentially, the more people that get this work done, the more people that can get this work done, because we find that word of mouth is the most effective way that people are engaging in these clean energy programming. So we have power in the people, and we have to essentially continue to empower them to continue these projects.
Thank you, Sahara and Jenna. And Samir now has a couple of slides on an exciting program on the horizon.
Yep, and I'm going to try to be a little bit quick. So this will definitely be a crash course in Cap and Invest, which is a significant revenue generating mechanism. It's called New York's Cap and Invest program, as the abbreviation is NY-GEO. The state team has nicknamed the policy NICI. That makes it the sibling of Reggie, and it rolls off the tongue easier. So, as you know, as buildings make up about 1/3 of our state's emissions, this is really going to be a catalyst for driving investment in air source and ground source heat pumps. So the way that it works is it will first set a limit over how much pollution can be allowed over the economy. It has a legally enforceable cap. And under that limit, there would be an emissions allowance budget representing the total amount of emissions that can be released in a given year. So the cap and the allowance budget would start out at the current level of emissions and decline every year to meet the emission reduction limits that we have in law in 2030 and in 2050. Each emissions allowance represents 1 metric ton of greenhouse gases emitted. And to help contextualize that, it takes burning about 115 gallons of gasoline to release 1 ton of greenhouse gases. So the entities that are responsible for large-scale sources of greenhouse gas emissions would be obligated to obtain the allowances from that budget to cover each ton of greenhouse gases they are going to release. There are 2 categories of entities that would be obligated. The first is stationary sources that release at least 25,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases a year. This is like manufacturing facilities, landfills, and large buildings like hospitals and college campuses. The other type are diffuse emissions that are covered, that are released in our transportation and building sectors. The fuel suppliers that sell liquid or gaseous fossil fuels to an end user in New York would be obligated to buy an allowance for every ton of greenhouse gases that their fuels release when they're burned. And at the thresholds that are proposed, 99% of the fuel suppliers in New York State would be obligated to participate in this program. Most of the obligated entities would get the allowances they need through auctions that are run by the state. And at the end of every reporting period, the entities would need to surrender the allowances that they have to the Department of Environmental Conservation to equal the emissions that they're responsible for, and those allowances would be retired and not used again. So requiring obligated entities to purchase an allowance obviously creates a disincentive for them to pollute and encourages them, and so this disincentive will increase over time as the price of allowances progressively gets more expensive as the cap is lowered and there are fewer allowances in supply. And so this is really how the cap creates a financial incentive to reduce emissions. We can certainly reduce emissions even further by investing the proceeds from the allowance auctions into emission reduction projects. And before I get to that, I just want to share that the state team has modeled the impacts of NICI, a combination of a benefits payment that would be received by most New York households and the investments. And it found that the greatest concentration of air pollution reductions from this program would occur where pollution currently does the most harm. It would result in, for the average low and middle income household, it would result in bill savings, or definitely for the average low-income household, and for middle-income households, it should cover at least 80% of their increased costs. It would increase access to modern, clean energy technology and infrastructure, and it would create more jobs that are green jobs, and we'll work on making them just as Jenna alluded to. But to realize all of these benefits, which are pretty significant, we all know that we have to make clean energy, more accessible, which is the earlier part of this discussion on reducing the barriers. Just really quickly, I'll share the budget. This was enacted in the budget last year that Governor Hochul signed with the legislature. Created the Climate Action Fund. It has 3 different sub-accounts. The Consumer Climate Action Account, that will get 30% of the revenues from the Cap and Invest program, and that will go out in the form of a benefits payment to New York households. There was a study done, a climate affordability study that the state had to do to see how we can make this effective and equitable. I'd highly recommend you check that out at climate.ny.gov. Then there is 3% would go to an industrial small business account. That would be to offset any potentially cost increases faced by industrial small business customers. Then 67% would go to programs and initiatives that were identified in the scoping plan, and this can cover clean energy, climate resilience and adaptation, and certainly, the clean energy can include geothermal. And also the eligible projects, funded by that account have to meet labor standards, and this whole thing will have to meet the requirement of 35 to 40% of the benefits of the spending occurring in disadvantaged communities. So I know that was really quick. Feel free to ask questions or reach out to me later. I'd love to tell you more about this program, but it's a significant revenue generation mechanism.
And actually, let's just do a big round of applause for everybody here. Sahara, Samir, and Jenna, thank you so much for sharing your learnings and your expertise. We probably have time for just one quick question if someone has something burning. There are no quick questions.
I gotta call you back. I do have a comment, observation, recommendation. When I walked into this session, if I remember what it said was, how do you move from early adopters to heat pumps for all? With no disrespect to you, the panel, you were focused 100% on LMI and disadvantaged communities, which I have no issue with. All right? I think they're entitled to have the same things that everyone else does. And they're not in the same position to afford it. I get that. All right? I can tell you as a contractor, as you've indicated already, the hoops that we have to jump through make us not want to do them. I can tell you that I've had dealings with Empower. I don't want to deal with them. All right? Even within PSEG to get LMI rebates, ridiculous sometimes. Okay? The rest of what I would have to say is more about what do we really need to do to get all? Number one, I can tell you from 20 years in the solar business that the way it got started was through education. There's not enough education going on. There's not enough direct communication with homeowners through seminars, through ways to educate them on what's available. They need advocates that can walk them through the process. All right? Somebody that isn't a contractor, but is advocating for them and help them get through with the contractors the programs that are available to them. All right? But all represents everyone. And my thought was, how do we get the rest? Not necessarily just LMI and disadvantaged communities, everyone else. It comes down to money. I get it. And the disadvantaged and the LMI need more funds, where the others that don't should only get a little bit. But they can afford it. And my expectation at this session was it was going to cover all, and it did not. That's my observation. Thank you.
Well, I think that was a resounding endorsement of the hubs and the great work, Jenna and Sahara, that you're doing to handhold folks who are going through these programs, and especially your great work with contractors who do want to make these programs work. And Sahara, I think you had.
As you said, Avni, that is exactly what we're doing through the New York hubs. I'm working on the Queens and Staten Island hub and the Manhattan hub. The Finger Lakes hub is here, and we specifically are working with residents to connect them with a contractor, educate them, and pull them all the way through that process. I agree with you. That is 100% needed, and so that is what the hubs is trying to do. When we think about electrifying for all, and we know that money is one of the biggest barriers to electrification, it only makes sense that we have to address the people who have the least amount of money and also have the least amount of education. And so when we think about all, we have to think about the people who are non-English speakers, who are immigrant communities, who are making less income. They are also usually the ones missing that education. And also for people who are not even low income, and NYSERDA does have market rate programs as well, usually you'll actually see the same barriers to adoption. It'll just be less of those barriers. So I think of it as like, what is the saying? The rising tide, all ship lifts all boats. The rising tide lifts all boats. So if we are helping the people who need the most help, we are always going to capture the people who also are in maybe a little less need of help as well. That's not to say that we ignored, market rate customers. We're doing outreach to everyone as much as we can. But I do find that there are a lot of commonalities that usually lower income and non-English speaking immigrant communities are dealing with. They're usually just dealing with it the most. But we usually find that we're still getting a catch-all of people with our engagement.
Yeah, raise your hand if you would consider yourself market rate and you're currently on natural gas. Market rate, natural gas. Yeah, so that's part of the all. I'm also in there too. So I think exactly to her point, like the solutions we put here today, while we definitely emphasize those communities, if the natural gas exclusion ends, I can get a heat pump. I can't right now. I can't get the incentive at least, and I definitely am not so far into the market rate that I can just do it because it's in my heart. So, yeah, I definitely encourage you all to get to know your clean energy hubs and think of them as that unbiased client advocate. We don't make any money off it. We are there for the good of the people, and that is for the good of all.
Thank you so much, Jenna and Sahara, and what a perfect way to end this panel. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of the day, and probably see some of y'all at happy hour.